You are listening to the Tricorder Transmissions, ep096. And now, here are Craig and Jeff.
Thanks for tuning in to episode 96 of the Tricorder Transmissions. Today, we're going to be taking a look at Gold Key Comics, issue number 15, Day of the Inquisitors. I'm your host, Jeff Hewlett. My regular co-host, Craig Cohen, is on assignment this week and is unable to join us. So sitting in for him tonight is show regular. He should be familiar to everybody, Chris Ritzer. How you doing, Chris?
Hey, what's up, dude? Thanks for having me on. I feel like a minor leaguer getting called up and having like the first major league start or something. It's pretty exciting.
So yeah, I'm excited to have you here tonight because I know that you are an avid Trek novel reader. I know you've been reading them for a long time since I've known you. So I'm very interested to hear your perspective of how these comic books, these early comic books, hold up against some of the Trek novels that you have read.
Sounds good.
All right. So I'm going to be asking you a little bit about that as we go. So we're still with writer Len Wein. He's been with us for a few issues now, and I think we've got a couple more Len Weins before we change again. Our artist is still Alberto Giolitti, and this time we have the inker also listed as Angelo Todaro. Cover art by George Wilson. And it was published in November of 1972. We got 32 pages. And the star date, or at least the starting star date, is 4525.2. Again, still sometime in the 2260s. And we're continuing with the trend with the painted cover that illustrates some of the action that happens within the pages of the comic. So we're well past the promotional photo stock covers that we'd had earlier on, and we're continuing on with this trend, which is pretty cool because this cover has something that I don't know if we've ever seen anything quite like it before. We've got Mr. Spock in this flowing black, like monk's robes.
I tell you what, he looks like he really wants to chop this guy's head off too, really bad. He's really pissed off looking like, yeah, I'm going to take you out.
Yeah, he's got an angry expression. He's got a sword in his hand, and there's some other humanoids kind of in the background there, and it's a little bit ominous. So we're going to get in this little premonition that there's going to be some sword play action coming up, and I think the cover does a really good job of letting us know what we're in for.
Oh, yeah, certainly.
Definitely. And there's a tagline here that says, "Missing in action on a dark age planet." So not giving away quite as much as some of the prior issues did, but enough to entice us. But another funny thing I wanted to mention before we get too into this comic, this is kind of a funny thing that happened over the weekend. As I was doing my notes for this episode, I realized that there's a character that's been added into this issue, and I don't know if this character continues on after this or not, but there's a public relations officer, Claire, that's added to this issue, and the spelling of her name is exactly the same spelling as Claire Little, who is co-host of the Atavachron series here at Tricorder Studios, and she's also on a couple of the other shows and will be making appearances on our upcoming Shore Leave show, which is starting in the next couple of weeks. And so I posted a picture of public relations officer Claire on Twitter, and I was, poking fun at Claire, saying that she was in the Gold Key comics, and we had a lot of fun talking back and forth about that. So very cool to see somebody named in a comic book here that is a similar name to somebody we know. And it's cool because she turns out to be a pretty neat character through this issue.
Yeah, first when I first saw the character, I thought it was actually Nurse Chapel. But then I saw it was the public relations officer. I'm like, whoa, they still have public relations officers. Pretty cool.
Yeah, and we never saw any of those on the show, so it's kind of neat that they added that in here in the comic. So nice that they're adding their own canon in, and they're adding their own officers to the ship. This time on the show this week, I'm going to give you the proper spoiler countdown that I messed up last week. I'm not going to read the page one blurb or give away the page one spoilers without warning you first. So I'm going to give the traditional 3 count and let you know that once the 3 count is done, we're going to be talking about the issue and there's spoilers. So if you want to read it yourself, please pause us and go read the issue and come back and pick up with us. So in 3, 2, 1. All right, so we've got the typical page 1 again in this comic that gives us a glimpse into the happenings later on in the issue. And there's a blurb on this page that says, shipwrecked on an alien planet, Captain James T. Kirk and his companions find themselves prisoners of a strange cult of power-mad fanatics with little hope of the Starship Enterprise coming to their rescue. And the imagery on this page, I think, is the most dire imagery I've seen in a Gold Key comic yet. We've got Mr. Spock suspended from the ceiling, shirtless, with a guy behind him with a whip in his hand, implying that Spock has been tortured in some way. It's a little kind of off-putting. There's a robed figure standing kind of off to the side who is calling Spock a demon and threatening him if he doesn't give up some information that he has. And there's some other hooded, robed figures in the background. And it kind of reminds me a little bit of the Kirk and McCoy torture scenes from the 3rd season episode, The Empath, where they were suspended from the ceiling.
Good call.
Yeah, that really immediately took me right back to that. So, yes. Chris, what are your thoughts on this page? Do you think this is a little dark for these comics, or?
Yeah, that's what I thought, actually. Yeah, when I first opened, I'm like, whoa, this looks like pretty serious. Like, yeah, Spock's getting tortured and all that, and Kirk seems all concerned, like bad stuff's going down.
Yeah, really, really weird. And, we've seen some strange things in prior issues, but this seemed to cross a different line. The whole torture, corporal punishment thing, by cult members, seems even a little dark for Trek. I guess in our modern day here, in 2016, we're used to seeing these horrible things on television shows, but I was wondering back in the early 70s, how people would react to something like this.
I'm surprised this got past the Comics Code Authority.
Did they even have the Comics Code Authority at that point? I don't even know.
That's a good question. I'm not sure when that started up.
Yeah, I'll have to look that up and check because, this does seem, especially if this was aimed at children. Maybe this was more intended to be read by adults, but
yeah, true.
It definitely seems more of an adult-oriented comic. So, any further thoughts on this opening page before we start up with the first part of the comic?
Yeah, it's you actually see later on. There's actually a bit of a contradiction here with Kirk. He doesn't get caught.
That's true.
So, and I guess is that supposed to be McCoy in the back? I guess.
I think so. It's hard to tell.
I see, like, 2 guys with like the green-looking gold shirts. I was like kind of getting confused there. I was expecting like a red shirt in there or something.
Yeah, some of these colorations of shirts in the comics still don't quite match up necessarily with the people on the show. And McCoy winds up sometimes in green shirts and sometimes is in a blue shirt. And I thought that the coloration on Officer Claire's shirt being blue, that's more of I would have thought she'd have been more of a gold color shirt.
Yeah, true.
But we'll get more into that as we get into the issue here. The issue starts out with Captain Kirk, Mr. Spock, Dr. McCoy, Chekhov, and Public Relations Officer Claire appear to be returning to the Enterprise from a diplomatic mission, and they're flying in the shuttlecraft Galileo, and thankfully Galileo is drawn faithfully to the show, so no more strange-looking.
I was surprised about that.
Yeah, I was too. when I saw it. So they were on a diplomatic mission to a planet called Tarsus 4. That may sound familiar to some of you. We're going to get to that in a minute. Spock is checking out the instruments on the shuttlecraft and picks up a cluster of what he calls spheroid objects, and they're hurtling towards the shuttlecraft at a tremendous speed. Kirk tells him to turn on the deflector shield as fast as he can and get them out of the way, but unfortunately, they're not fast enough. There's some sort of a malfunction, and they've lost control of the ship, and it winds up being a meteor storm. So we got a really cool image of the Galileo shuttlecraft being battered by a bunch of small meteors. So after the meteor shower is over, Spock says that the shuttlecraft is really off course. and he's unable to steer it at all. There's no controls available. So the shuttle is caught in the gravitational field of a nearby planet and begins to be pulled down into the atmosphere, apparently on a collision course. Spock is desperately trying to regain control as the shuttle is heating up through the atmosphere of the planet, leaving a big flame trail behind it. Just before they smash into the ground, Spock is able to pull the nose of the shuttle up and save them by landing in a bunch of trees that break the shuttlecraft's fall. And everyone seems to be all right. However, the shuttle is absolutely wrecked beyond any form of repair. And unfortunately, the communication system is also damaged, so they are unable to contact the Enterprise for assistance. The group sets off looking for some sort of civilization where, after a while, they discover a road, and they find at the end of that road a giant city. So we're going to stop here because a lot has happened in this opening sequence, and there's a lot of really cool stuff here to talk about. First thing I want to talk about is the appearance of the Galileo shuttlecraft. So this is the first appearance of the Galileo in the comic book. And
oh, wow.
Yeah, if we remember back in the series, in the episode The Galileo 7, that shuttlecraft was actually destroyed in that episode. But it did return 2 more times, one in season 2's Metamorphosis. It carried Spock's parents, Sarek and Amanda, from Vulcan in Journey to Babel. So its final appearance actually appeared 3 more times. It appeared in the Immunity Syndrome when Spock used it to help destroy the giant space amoeba. So that shuttle has seen its fair share of use in TOS, and now it has been apparently destroyed 2 times as it's been wrecked in this issue. So, Chris, what did you think of the Galileo? I thought the drawing of it was really cool, especially that meteor shower panel.
Oh, yeah, that was really cool. Yeah, it was well done, definitely. Yeah, I was really surprised to see they actually drew it properly.
Yeah, considering the last shuttlecraft we saw was completely different.
The one thing I don't think they drew too good were Spock's ears. They're like really, really big. I mean, they're like Dumbo size almost.
Yes, that varies between issues, and even sometimes in the same issue, they'll be a little bit different. So there's some weird stuff that goes on. This artist, you would have thought by now, he's drawn so many issues, he'd have it all down. But later on in this issue, we have some more talk about appearances of characters, so I'm going to kind of hold off a little bit on too much more comment. Any other thoughts on the use of Galileo in this, or the destruction thereof?
I guess it held up pretty good because they survived. Nothing got pounded. So, way to go, Galileo.
Yeah, the wreckage was a little bit twisted there. I'm surprised that they all got out of that without injury. So let's see. The planet Tarsus 4 that they were returning from this diplomatic mission on Tarsus 4, and I immediately felt a connection to that name, and I went in and I looked around and I remembered that Tarsus 4 is actually the planet where Kirk first encountered Kodos the Executioner, which led to the events of the first season episode, The Conscience of the King. So very cool show tie-in there. And I wonder if a lot of people picked up on that back in the day when this comic came out. I mean, we didn't have things like Wikipedia back then or Memory
probably
Alpha.
Probably not then. It might have been like, yeah, because when I saw that, I'm like, well, it sounds familiar, but I didn't go check it out or anything like that. So, interesting. That's very cool.
During that sequence, Public Relations Officer Claire says that she feels that the Tarsus 4 people will consider joining the Federation, so there must be some sort of a new power structure that formed on that planet after the aftermath of the Kodos genocide that occurred there. So Kodos was famous for his eugenics policies, and picking and choosing who he allowed to live and die during this food crisis that happened, that Captain Kirk and a couple of his colleagues were witnesses to. So I really, really like that they're tying in these things from the show. And I don't know if there was some sort of a writer's guide that they gave to Len Wein and the writers of these comics, or Len just knew enough about the show from having watched it, because that seems like an obscure reference.
Yeah, I think they would get some kind of Bible or something like that so they don't veer too far off course. But who knows? That'd be impressive if he was actually familiar with it and tied it in on purpose like that. That'd be nice.
Very, very neat throwbacks. And this is the last couple of issues we've had a few of these. So I think that about wraps up my thoughts for this portion. Any other things stand out to you? I love the fact that Chekhov is back and actually part of the away team this time. Chekhov kind of comes and goes in these comics.
Yeah, I was really surprised to see that they have pretty much the entire crew, I think, in this issue. So that was really nice to see. I dig that.
Yeah, everybody except Nurse Chapel, I think, makes an appearance in this one. And that's not a common thing in Gold Key at this point. And hoping down the road this becomes a permanent thing. But, we've seen a few. They had everybody on one issue a while back, and then they just scaled back for some reason and ditched Uhura and Chekhov and Sulu for a while. I'm not sure if it was just because they didn't have roles for them to fill in those stories or whatnot, but nice to see Chekhov back. So, as they approach the city, two men wearing medieval-style costumes and carrying swords are seen guarding the gates. Kirk and Spock decide to sneak up on them and knock them both out with punches. Once inside the city, the group sees several figures wearing black robes and dragging some poor old guy down the street. Kirk feels compelled to help this poor guy, even though he doesn't really know what's going on. And he and the other members of the landing party attack the robed, hooded guys and drive them away. As the guys are running away, they refer to Kirk and Spock and his cohorts as instruments of someone they call the Dark One. Old man thanks Kirk for saving his life, and they asked him why he was being carried away. And the old guy goes into an explanation basically telling us about what is actually going on this planet. So we get this expose here letting us know that they call those robed guys Inquisitors. They're members of some sort of a cult who have the upper hand, kind of control things. And a plague of madness covers the land, according to him. They hold people prisoner and they torture them as enemies of the state to maintain their power. Anybody who opposes them gets dragged off into the castle dungeons and made to confess their crimes. So that's where he was apparently being taken when the Enterprise away team intervened. His name winds up being Corbin, and he has been branded a heretic. So let's pull over to the side of the road again here. I heard you chuckling, and I think you were chuckling for the same reason that I was taken aback by this. I have a humongous problem with the way that Kirk and Spock just blatantly attack these two guys unprovoked.
This is not befitting a Starfleet officer. I mean,
not at all.
Totally jump out and take them out.
Yeah, I mean, these guys were just doing their job. They're guarding the gate, and they weren't threatening anybody. There was no verbal exchange whatsoever. Spock and Kirk just jump out and attack these guys as if they know that they're villains, which to me seems very, very strange because I don't even know if we've ever seen that on the show before. I mean, there's always some precedential evidence before attacking.
Yeah, like Kirk never needed too much of an excuse to attack somebody, but usually he had an excuse at least. This time, there was nothing. It was just wham. And especially, it's very shocking for Spock to do that too. I mean, I think that'd be totally against his Vulcan nature, but I guess not.
I agree with you. And furthermore, after they knock the guards out, there's what I thought was a very bizarre exchange of dialogue where Kirk says to Spock, "Someday, Mr. Spock, you'll underestimate an enemy and you won't live to regret it." And Spock responds in a very Vulcan fashion and says regret is a human emotion and therefore he wouldn't feel it. But I'm not sure what purpose that dialogue serves other than to make reference to Spock's lack of emotions and kind of drive home the whole Vulcan concept. I mean, I know in the panel before the attack, Spock regards the guards as a minor diversion, but that didn't seem like, hubris to me. I think he was just referring to the fact that there were 5 members of this away team and only 2 of the guards. I mean, but for Kirk to almost have a death wish style response.
Yeah.
That just seemed really out of character for Kirk. Yeah. I mean, I could have seen like a joke there, but that didn't play as a joke to me.
Yeah, definitely. I came across it as serious. I guess they just want to put some foreshadowing in, but it's kind of forcing it, I think, at that point in time. And at least with that exchange, it's kind of just it's overkill.
I didn't even think about the foreshadowing aspect. That's actually a good explanation for it because Spock does get in over his head a little bit later
Yeah.
in the issue. So maybe that was a foreshadowing device. So good spot there. Here's another thing that I thought was a little bit weird. That this was something that happened in the last issue. Kirk uses the word spooks in reference to the robed guys that they attack. And McCoy used the word spook to describe the blue dog creature in the prior episode that we just did last week. So that is a word that I don't hear at all unless you're talking about a ghost. But, I don't hear that word used. Now, I was very surprised to see it used in the comic once, and I'm even more surprised to see it used twice.
Yeah, the lexicon has definitely changed since then.
It definitely has. And granted, they're not using that word in a racist way in the comic book, but it seems to have very weird connotations to it because I know back then it was used in a racist way. So surprised to see it included in a Star Trek comic. I don't think Roddenberry would have stood for that.
Nah. Yeah, I don't think Gene was reading the comics.
Yeah, I highly doubt it. I think this was more of a Paramount deal.
Yeah.
But yeah, shame to use that type of terminology in a Star Trek piece of literature. But I guess at the time maybe it was meant to be innocent, but who knows? Any more thoughts on the breaking in and attacking inside the city and saving Corbin before we move on, Chris?
Well, yeah, and after mugging the guards outside their castle, they just go and mug the police and free this guy. They don't know anything about him.
Exactly, this guy could be a criminal.
Lot of yeah, exactly. I mean, it just wow. Maybe there's something in the air on this planet or something. It just brings out violent emotions.
Yeah, a lot of supposition going on Kirk's part here and Spock's part as they haven't even uttered a word to anybody before they attack two sets of guards,
Yeah.
Right? I mean, who knows? This guy could have been a murderer or, that they're dragging away. There could have been a perfectly legit reason, but I guess Kirk and Spock just suppose that he's being treated unfairly or unjustly and jump in. It's like it's almost as if there was something missing.
Yeah, true.
All right. Well, anything else before we move along or?
Yeah, I like the last panel of McCoy. It looks just like him. Good job by the artist.
Yes, and I agree with you that I think he looks really good in this issue. And there's some other characters coming up right here after this break, which I think look really, really good. So let's jump into that. Now we're flashing over. We're on the Enterprise now, and kind of a parallel storyline here. Scotty is in the captain's chair, preparing to initiate some emergency procedures, and the shuttlecraft they know has gone missing. So they're going to start their search when Uhura receives a message from Starfleet Command, and they are ordered to head to the Sigma Quadrant where some sort of disaster has occurred and they're in need of the Enterprise's help. Scotty refuses to abandon the search for Kirk and company and orders Mr. Sulu to use the ship's sensors for a sectional space probe. And he exclaims, "We ain't leaving here till we locate the captain," even if it means he's going to risk a court-martial. We're flashing back to the planet. It's nighttime on the planet's surface. Kirk and company don some of the local clothing in order to blend in, much as we've seen them do on some of the away missions on the show. Corbin leads them very cautiously through the city's walkways and alleyways, searching for the parts they need to repair the shuttlecraft's damaged communications equipment. So Corbin, in the meantime, is telling them about a nearby rebel camp that he is a part of. It's out in the mountains, and he is sure that his rebel friends will help Kirk and company to get what they need. And at that point, suddenly, they come across a number of the robed Inquisitors again, and this time they see them carrying the damaged radio equipment from the shuttlecraft. So apparently the Inquisitors have found the crashed ship. Spock recommends strongly that the group make contact with the rebels in the mountains before mounting any kind of an attack against the castle to rescue their gear. But Kirk insists that by the time they do that, it'll be too late, and they can't take that chance. So he makes the party split up. Corbin and McCoy and Kirk will go to the rebel camp, while Spock Chekhov and Public Relations Officer Claire will head to the castle, but he warns Spock not to do anything foolish, and he doesn't want the Enterprise to wind up finding a bunch of dead men and, of course, a woman, which he doesn't say. But this is the end of the first part of the comic. The group is now split up, and Spock and company seem to be in a pretty dangerous scenario here, Chris, and it almost seems very irresponsible to me that Captain Kirk would split them up in such a way.
Yeah, I guess he has a lot of faith in Spock to get the job done, and the rest of his officers. But yeah, definitely taking chances, and yeah, I guess he's figuring too, since they have the parts they need, might as well get a move on. And yeah, it's definitely a risky proposition for him.
Yeah, well, one thing I think is actually pretty cool about this is that there's no gender bias here. He has enough confidence in Public Relations Officer Claire, who I guess must have some sort of combat training.
Yeah.
And he sends her along to invade this castle instead of taking her along on the safer route and going to get help. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that part. So Scotty actually files a captain's log here, which is pretty neat. So he's captain's log, stardate 4325.6. Lieutenant Commander Scott reporting. They got his rank right, too. The shuttlecraft carrying the captain and the others is long overdue. We are preparing to initiate emergency procedures. So I like the fact that this keeps up with the canon from the show, and Scotty is left in charge of the ship while all the other ranking officers are off on an away mission. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, I was happy to see that. I wasn't expecting that, and yeah, it was good to see they have continuity there.
Yeah, and Scotty in this issue finally looks exactly like James Doohan from the show.
Yeah, I think they probably had some still photos and based a few of these drawings on them, because I think a few of them, yeah, they look exactly like the actors in a few of these panels. So I think they really started putting the pedal to the metal and doing their job, and yeah, much better.
Scotty, I think, is the one character through all of the Gold Key comics we've seen so far who has changed in appearance so much and who has deviated so much. So it's nice to finally see, after 16 issues, they finally got Scotty down. Everybody else has been relatively correct. I mean, Kirk early on had some differences where he didn't quite look like Shatner, but he didn't look really that much different than Shatner. So it was like, well, okay. Sulu's always been good. Spock's always been relatively good. Uhura, when they bring her in, is always good. So it was very weird that they just couldn't get Scotty right. I mean, he had blonde hair for the longest time. It was just, he looked, actually, there was a lot of issues where he looked almost exactly like Captain Kirk. So, yeah. I mean, the incorrect Captain Kirk, by the way.
Yeah, that's not good. Then you really start getting your characters confused.
Yeah, very, very good. So on page 11, panel 3, you can see that close-up image of Scotty that I was talking about. So if anybody's following along out here and wants to look up that particular image, that's where you can find it.
Yeah, I'm glad they got his characterization correct, too, because this is exactly what Scotty would do on the TV show.
Oh, absolutely.
He would just say, yeah, the hell with my orders, I'm staying, I'm going to find the captain. So yeah, that's good to see that they're keeping them consistent, personality-wise.
The continuity is strong in this issue. I'm very glad to say that. Except for
the away team.
Yeah, well, and except for Uhura wearing a blue uniform instead of a red one. Page 11, panel 2, you see Uhura sitting at her console but wearing a blue uniform. But thankfully, the bridge, which has been questionable in many of the past episodes, looks a lot more like the bridge from the show. I mean, you've got the chairs right, you've got Uhura in the right place, you got Sulu in the right place. So, in the past, we've always seen some bizarre variations on the bridge. And I think in the last issue, we had Kirk's chair right, but Spock was at some sort of a red console that in the middle of the bridge that didn't look at all like where he was supposed to be. So, it's nice to finally see that. And but we've seen some things like this in the past, but then they change back again in the next issue. So we can hope for more consistency going forward. The disguises that Kirk and McCoy put on down on the planet seem really over the top to me. I don't know how you feel about it. McCoy is wearing like this turban headpiece and this weird yellow tunic, and Kirk is dressed like some kind of a royal guard with those circular shoulder pads, almost like a British royal guard. How are you not sticking out?
Yeah, I guess,
dressed like
well,
that?
beggars can't be choosers when you need a costume, and you don't have replicators. So
Yeah, that's true.
I guess take what you can get. But yeah, I guess yeah, it sort of sticks out a little bit. Unless this is the norm. It's if you haven't been arrested, maybe they'll let you walk around like this. Who knows?
I guess. I mean, I guess. Well, Spock and his group wind up putting on the robes, which seems like a much better idea to
Yeah.
me. A much better way to get around without anybody questioning you. If you're just wearing those robes with the big hood, you can't even see your face. I don't know. Before we move on, Chris, any last thoughts on this part of the comic?
No, I think that takes care of it.
All right. So we are following along with Spock's group first. They're wearing the black robes of the Inquisitors now, and Spock, Chekhov, and Claire are able to get relatively close to the castle without being challenged. So Spock quickly whips out the Vulcan nerve pinch and disables the guards in front of the castle, which this is the first time we've seen the nerve pinch, which is cool.
And that's the thing, you don't actually see the nerve pinch though.
No, I know.
It's mentioned, and it's that was a shame. I was really looking forward to it, and no.
The illustrated nerve pinch.
Yes.
But so they all go into the castle to begin searching for the missing radio. So now the scene shifts, and the Enterprise is continuing its search for the shuttlecraft. Sulu is reporting in that the Enterprise has covered less than half the possible alternative flight paths of the shuttlecraft, so they have a lot of work left to do when Uhura receives a signal from Starfleet ordering the ship to abandon its search. So Scotty gets a little bit PO'd by that and exclaims, they've just ordered me to let my best friends die. So once again, we shift back to the castle scene. Spock discovers that the radio equipment is pretty heavily guarded and is going to be a little bit difficult. So Mr. Chekhov, in true Chekhov fashion, creates a diversion by insulting some of the guards, calling them a lop-eared son of a Vulcan water beetle. I guess it's a Russian accent in print. And while they're dealing with Chekhov and his insult, Spock and Claire sneak up behind them and attack. So they quickly make it inside the room, and their presence, the noise that they were making, alerts some of the other Inquisitors to the fact that there's something going on. So the Inquisitors, thinking they're being attacked by minions of the Dark One, take to action and start to look for the intruders. So Spock sneaks in and begins collecting the radio equipment and surmises that he will be able to repair it if he can get this equipment out, but before he can escape, he's knocked unconscious by a blow to his head from behind. When he wakes up, Spock finds himself prisoner along with the other two in a large throne room, and the leader of the Inquisitors is standing right before him and is taunting him, calling him minions of the Dark One, and gloating over their victory. Spock finally, after all of this, starts to explain their situation and how they've crash-landed here and they didn't intend to come here, and asks for the return of the radio equipment. So the Inquisitor, the Grand Inquisitor, of course, assumes that they're lying and they're actually spies or minions of the Dark One.
I think they'd be lying too if they knocked a bunch of my guys out, broke into my castle.
Yeah, really. I mean, it's amazing to me that they don't actually ask for help or plead their case until they're caught.
Yeah.
So the Grand Inquisitor orders that the three of them be taken to the interrogation chambers. So here's another quick break. So again, we mentioned the first appearance of the nerve pinch, or the written form of the nerve pinch. And funny, we briefly wondered on the last episode of the show when we were going to see Spock use any of his Vulcan abilities, because they've been strangely missing from the comics. So at least, we didn't see it in drawing form, but at least it was finally mentioned.
Yeah, it felt so cheap though. It's because I remember you guys mentioned that last episode, and then when it's mentioned but not seen, I'm like, oh, come on now.
Yeah,
hopefully soon.
Yeah, let's keep our fingers crossed that, or our nerve pinches crossed, that we actually get a nerve pinch drawn. It'd be great to see a little close up of the hand over the shoulder.
Yes.
That would be kind of cool. So now, page 16, panel 1, Chris, I don't know if you noticed this, but it depicts the Enterprise from outside, and it's emitting like this spread of yellow light from where the phasers are normally fired. And
Yes.
I was wondering, it's not explained exactly what that is, but we know that the Enterprise is in the middle of searching for the shuttlecraft. This is after Scotty asks Sulu to use that particular scan. So I'm wondering if this was what that yellow beam was supposed to be. What did you think?
Yeah, that's what I was figuring. Yeah, it's probably their scan and beam, and that's the interpretation of it.
Oh, all right. Well, we're on the same page then. I guess we're going to have to go with that. But sadly, again, Scotty's appearance is good in this issue, and I'm glad to see it. But that handwritten Scottish accent in this is it's there in full force again. Especially there's a line where he's responding to Uhura, and he says, and I'm going to try to read this. It's ye know bloomin' well what's delaying us. We're searching for our captain. And I'm like, I just it really bugs me. I don't know why. Maybe I'm reading too much into this, but
yeah, I could see blooming in there, but the rest of it you could just write it normal, and I mean you're gonna hear it in your head. I mean there's really no need to put this much inflection in.
yeah. And we've been complaining about this the entire comic run, so maybe it's time that we let it go and just deal with it. I'm beginning to sound like I'm whining about it. So
I remember that actually happened though in X-Men with this character Gambit. He was like Cajun, and they just went totally overboard with how they would write out his accent sometimes, and it's like, what the hell am I reading? So it's just a comic trope.
All right. I'm with you.
One thing I was thinking about actually was with Starfleet, they want these guys on the Enterprise getting going to the disaster or whatever that happened.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering, I wonder if that has something to do with the meteor shower. Maybe like the Death Star came through and blew up a planet.
Oh, check that out. I didn't even think about it. Yeah, that meteor shower from earlier.
Yeah, that was like the first thing I thought about. I'm like, well, it seems to have come out of nowhere and like not on sensors and all that stuff like immediately. And it was like, they just showed right up and then pounded them.
Yeah, that's a really great thought. That's a really great thought. So, I guess that maybe the disaster is important enough that Starfleet wants to abandon who arguably the best captain and first officer in the fleet.
Mm-hmm.
It must be pretty serious.
Yeah, Vulcan blew up.
Yeah. Oh yeah. The 2009 timeline starts in Gold Key.
Yes.
Wouldn't that be something? Continuity bit here. Extrapolated continuity bit by me, but I love that Scotty refers to Kirk, Spock, and McCoy as his best friends. I love that relationship is being carried over into the comic, and they're not just disconnected crewmen serving together on the ship. That relationship that was built over those 3 seasons of the show is manifesting itself in this comic strip. So fantastic stuff.
Yes, I definitely agree.
Yeah. And here's that this is where that moment for Public Relations Officer Claire happened as well, as she just jumps into the fisticuffs and kicks the guard in the shin to take him out.
I think it's on its. Oh yeah, I guess that is the shin. Yeah, it didn't kick him in the nuts. Okay.
Yeah, it looked like the shin to me. I didn't want to assume it was the testicles. But I love the fact that they've got the female away team officer right there in the fray, and she can hold her own. That seems very Trek to me.
Yeah, definitely. Very Trek. That's cool to see. Yeah.
Excellent. So I'm hoping that Public Relations Officer Claire recurs in future fisticuff scenes, and we can see her beating up some Klingons or something.
Yeah, make her head of security or something.
Yeah, there you go. They never really had a security chief. Scotty kind of stepped in as a security chief once in a while.
Yeah, it seemed when they needed muscle, they went to Scotty, it seemed. But no real everyday hands-on security man.
No, there was no Worf on the original Enterprise. So maybe she could be the war for the Enterprise,
Yes, that sounds good.
Yeah, so, and, this is significant too, by the way, just as a side note. This is significant because this is the first time we've seen a female Starfleet member of the away team since the early issues, which included Janice Rand. So
okay.
there's been females with them, that they've met up with on planets and things. But this is the first female Starfleet officer we've seen as a part of an away team for quite a while. So pretty cool. Pretty cool. Any thoughts before we move on, Chris?
No, I think we're good.
Alrighty. So finally, we're jumping over to Captain Kirk and his story arc here in this episode. He is in the mountain camp and he is talking to the leader of these rebel forces, trying to get them to help storm the castle. So he's telling them that it will give his people a foothold against the Inquisitors and that the Enterprise crew can help them win their fight as long as they're willing to help get these radio parts back. So the rebel leader hems and haws for a little while before deciding that he is actually going to help Kirk and company. They gather the best warriors together and head for the castle with Kirk and McCoy leading the way. Meanwhile, inside the castle, we've got this torture scene. Spock is hanging from the ceiling again, and he's being whipped. And they're amazed at how much punishment the Vulcan can withstand without making any sort of sound whatsoever. They assume, of course, that it's demon powers that he's imbued with. He's one of the Dark Ones, after all. And Spock replies that he has no mystic talents, only my Vulcan ability to disregard pain. So we got another mention of Vulcan abilities here, which only serves to enrage the Inquisitors even more, resulting in them threatening to torture Claire instead. So Spock, to save Claire from that pain, agrees to tell the Inquisitors everything he knows. So back aboard the Enterprise, Uhura receives yet another call from Starfleet demanding that the Enterprise proceed to the Sigma Quadrant, where the disaster situation is growing worse and worse. Scotty's softening up a little bit here and says maybe they're right. Maybe it's time that they abandon the search, and that's what Captain Kirk would want them to do. He orders Sulu to plot a course for the Sigma Quadrant and abandon the search if they don't find a trace of Captain Kirk within 30 solar minutes. So the situation is growing quite dire here, Chris.
Yeah, things are pretty serious, whatever is going on, and Mr. Scott is starting to feel the heat, but getting his ass chewed out, and so he's finally gonna take off on his buddies, but can't really blame him at this point. I mean, if it's that serious, you gotta do what you gotta do. I mean, you're still in Starfleet, and you have to go where you're sent and follow the chain of command, so.
That is true. There is a military aspect here that they have to follow. And this situation reminds me of stuff that we've seen on the show before, like in the Gamesters of Triskelion, right? They're missing and everybody's looking for them. They got, teleported away. And, this has happened many, many, many times throughout the course of the show. So this is kind of a familiar device. So one thing I really thought was interesting that reminded me of things we've seen on the show before as well was Chekhov tries to intervene and save Claire by offering himself up for torture instead. That kind of reminds me of the Chekhov from episodes like Spectre of the Gun and The Apple, where, he's got that female officer with him that he wants to protect.
Yeah.
So that kind of carries over a little bit from the show as well. I thought that was a nice touch. See, Spock. Now, this is the weird thing to me. Seems a little out of character for Spock. I'm not sure. I'm going to run this by you because maybe I'm off base here. But Spock offering to divulge his knowledge to save Claire. Devil's advocate, Chris, is that the logical thing to do, or is that the human thing to do? Would logic dictate self-preservation, or would it dictate self-sacrifice?
I think logic would dictate just keeping your mouth shut. I don't think Spock would normally cave that quick. But I guess he's been getting tortured and he don't want her to go through that. Or maybe he's just trying to buy some time too.
That's
maybe
possible.
He's going to start spinning some yarns and well, not lie or anything, but he can always exaggerate.
That's true. That's true. Well, I mean, I guess I'll quote Spock here, and I'll throw out the old the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. So the people he would be protecting by keeping his mouth shut, by sacrificing, one person, maybe that sounds like more of the logical thing to do. But it's nice to see that Spock's human side, though, can shine through here, and he has some sort of empathy and sympathy for the pain that Claire would wind up having to endure should she be whipped the same way. So, that human Vulcan conflict is always a great part of Spock's character. I like there's more references to his Vulcan abilities, and again, that's something that's been ignored in these comics up until this issue.
Oh yeah, I guess the only other thing I want to talk about was with Kirk throwing his support behind these rebels. Now at this point, Kirk has mugged some guards, mugged some cops, and at this point he still has no idea who like the good guys or the bad guys are on this planet. Now he's offering these guys to help him overthrow the government. I guess the prime directive has just gone out the window here.
Yeah, that's one bit of show continuity that hasn't made its way over yet. Good points. That is true. So we don't know anything necessarily, or very very little, about what's really going on this planet. We don't. I mean, we're assuming that the Inquisitors are the quote unquote bad guys, and the rebels are the quote unquote good guys. But we really have no idea what really is going on here. And that you make a great point that it seems like Kirk just throws diplomacy completely out the window here. And I mean, we've seen Kirk be diplomatic many times in the past,
Certainly.
And this just seems very out of character for him to throw his lot in with these rebels. And how does he know what their cause really is?
Yeah, he's probably thinking to himself, I better be right.
Yeah, I mean, what are they even rebelling against? Do we even know? We don't know.
Yeah, it's...
Again, I'm going to blame this on the short form of the comic, and there's just not enough space in the comics to give any backstory. And this, again, I think I've said this on a prior episode at some point that, this is the days before you had multi-issue story arcs. So,
true. Yes,
this probably would benefit from having like a 3-issue arc where you can really get into some of the backstories and make it a little more intriguing. So, spread the action out. But again, 32 pages, including the splash page. So there ain't a lot of space here.
Now, is that 32 just straight up art pages?
Yeah.
Ah, wow. That, like, nowadays, that would actually be like 2 issues. Because now you're only getting, I think it's about maybe like 18 pages or something like that. Maybe 20 art pages. You don't get that many anymore.
No, that's true. And this comic is split, like all the other Gold Keys prior, it is split into a part 1 and part 2.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting that. I found that interesting.
Yeah, that's the way all of the issues have been up until this point. So even some of the earlier issues had separate titles for part 1 and part 2. But that practice has been abandoned in recent issues. But so maybe this really is 2 issues in one, but still, it's still not enough, to really flesh out all of the necessary storylines.
Yeah, if they could use one more chapter, maybe would have been nice.
Yeah,
like another part. Yeah, then you could have got everything flushed out, but it's all right. It works, I guess, sort of. It moves it along.
It does move along at a very, very quick pace. So we're getting close to the end here. So Kirk and McCoy arrive at the castle with the rebels in tow, using their phasers, which oddly they didn't use before. They blast through the castle doors, allowing the rebels to flood in through the gates, and Kirk then exclaims that the phasers have been completely drained of energy because they were apparently damaged in some way, and they're going to have to use their hand-to-hand skills.
I tell you what, this is a nice toss by McCoy here. It looks like he's just throwing a guy like an Ultimate Warrior press or something. It's fantastic.
Yeah, this is one of the parts that made me raise my Spock eyebrow though, because McCoy says that I hope, I'm thinking about the exact phrase, I hope I can remember my intergalactic judo lessons.
Yeah, that, I had the same reaction.
Yeah, and this is funny because I can't remember if it was 2 issues ago or 3 issues ago. There was a reference to intergalactic combat training as a hand-to-hand device. So they seem to be wavering on who gets what kind of training. So the doctor gets intergalactic judo.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, you can get your intergalactic judo or intergalactic taekwondo or karate. It get all different
Your Krav
intergalactic
Maga,
versions.
whatever it is. Yeah.
Hey, check it out, man. See, like Beastie Boys, they're having a influence here.
Yeah.
Ripping off their song Intergalactic. There we go.
Oh, man. Let's not get into the whole Beastie Boys topic. We beat that to death on our trailer analysis a few weeks back. But let's see. So they fight their way through this castle courtyard and find, luckily, the room where Spock and the others are being held captive. They are very quick to take down the Inquisitors that are guarding them, and the rebels are able to capture the castle relatively easily. Spock gets the radio equipment operating and radios the ship for help. So Scotty receives the transmission from the planet and is very surprised to hear from them. And Kirk explains they don't have the time to explain the whole situation and they need to be beamed out immediately. So, and they do actually get beamed out immediately. They dematerialize, and as they're disappearing, Kirk wishes the leader of the rebels good luck with his newfound freedom and the reform of the government, I guess, on the planet. So once back on the Enterprise, Kirk picks up Starfleet's orders and takes the ship to the Sigma Quadrant at Warp 8 to answer this distress signal. And as the issue is closing out, Kirk asks what will they report to Starfleet about the day's past adventure. Spock says that we accomplished our mission on Tarsus 4 and crash landed on a planet. So that's pretty much it. Kind of an anticlimactic ending here to this issue. No real humor at the end.
Yeah, that way I was expecting the usual Star Trek ending with a little bit of humor there, and there was nothing like that.
Yeah, nothing. It's a brief 2-sentence recap of what happened, and that's pretty much the closeout. I did kind of like the fact that they explained that the phasers had been damaged, and that's why they hadn't used them yet, because they kind of only had 1 or 2 good blasts before the phasers were dead. Kind of like the Borg, where you can only fire off 1 or 2 shots.
Yeah.
And then they're useless.
Yeah, when they whipped them out, I was like, oh yeah, they could have been using their phasers the whole time. But yeah, at least they had an excuse. So
it's good that they're using those show-like explanations for why the technology is disabled.
Yeah.
So another familiar Star Trek trope. Yeah, there was another a captain's log here right near the end. The star date was 4326.3, so time has elapsed a little bit here. And they're proceeding at warp factor 8. Now, Chris, forgive me if I'm wrong here, and I may be wrong, but isn't warp factor 8 a little fast for the original Enterprise?
I believe so. It's really difficult with the original series because it seems like their warp factors were all over the place, kind of. I'm not sure they ever really got that straightened out. So, yeah, I do think that seems pretty fast, though. I think we might have heard like a really high warp number, like maybe once, but you never heard anything, like not on a regular basis at least.
Yeah, and I believe the really high warp number was when the ship had been slightly modified by some aliens.
Yeah, probably.
And they were taking them to a planet that was beyond, the edge of space, or beyond the barrier, and they were flying at this incredible rate of speed, but the aliens were keeping the ship from breaking apart.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
I think they could do warp 8 in the refit Enterprise from the films, though, right?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the further Enterprises down the road, like in TNG, were able to do speeds like that.
Yeah, they could hit like warp 9.4 before it would start flying apart on them.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, I kind of like that the comic is at least sticking to the warp factor numbers somewhat.
Yeah, so definitely.
They didn't go like warp 12 or some nonsense, warp 14. Now, Chris, is Spock smiling in the last panel of this comic?
Yeah, you picked up that too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he definitely looks like he has a bit of a grin there.
Yeah. Spends half the issue beating the fact that he's Vulcan into our heads.
Yeah.
But in the last panel, he's smirking.
Yeah, maybe getting whipped had a bit more of a effect on him than he thought, and he cracked a little bit there.
Spock's getting a little kinky, eh?
Yeah.
The human side is coming out.
He's like, I like that getting whipped.
They whipped him into Ponfar.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, man. So any thoughts on this final sequence? I felt like the wrap-up was very, very quick.
Yeah, very quick. Yeah, for a regime that's supposed to be bad guys, they got defeated very fast. It went down without much of a fight. I think the wrong people are in charge now.
Yeah, it kind of lends some credence to the thought that the Inquisitors really were more of a small religious cult.
Yeah.
And not some sort of a militarized force. I don't think they were, combat ready. They had no kind of an army or any real, trained guards that were able to keep an invading force at bay. Because, the rebels didn't look like that big of a band.
Yeah, true.
So maybe they just weren't prepared for that level of violence. But who knows? The wrap-up was so quick. you could speculate for a while on this.
Yeah.
And try to understand what was going on. But, so now that we're at the end of the issue, Chris, what do you think of this Gold Key comic? I know you're pretty new to the comics themselves. So how does this stack up against some of the novels that you've been really fond of over the years?
I'd say it's almost on par, actually, with some of them, probably, because unfortunately, the Trek novels, I think, in recent years have not been that good. They have a couple of good authors here and there, but you do get a lot of poop in between. So, but the quality wasn't that bad with the comic here. I was definitely impressed with the continuity. That was nice. Overall, yeah, it's pretty close to what you almost get in some of the novels.
All right. Would this comic be good enough to entice you to read further comics in the series, you think?
Yeah, I'd read some more, and see how it goes.
Oh, very cool. Good to know. So I'm going to go ahead and give this issue a non-canon essential for several reasons. And, that we talked about them as we went through, but we got the appearance of two Vulcan, quote-unquote superpowers. We got the threshold for pain and the nerve pinch mentioned here. So that's cool. This is the first time in the comic series for those. And I love the fact that the Galileo gets destroyed again in this issue. That poor shuttlecraft, man, that thing can't get a break. So it's nice to see that it made its appearance here, though, and drawn very, very accurately. And, and here's a hopeful prediction for the future. I really hope that they bring Public Relations Officer Claire back in future issues. I think she was a pretty cool addition to the landing party. So I'm hoping that she makes an appearance. So, Chris, usually it's just me and Craig voting on these things, but since you're sitting in for Craig, do you agree that this is a non-canon essential?
Yeah, I would think so. Yeah, pretty much for the reasons you stated. I like that they got the characterization right. I don't know if that necessarily makes it essential, but yeah, seeing also more with Spock and him taking a licking and still ticking. So that's good for him. And it pretty much, for the most part, it felt like a Star Trek original series episode, so that was good. There were a couple things where they went a little bit overboard with the mugging and all that, but there was some good things in there. Especially, I really liked the parts with Scotty, too. Those were some of my favorite parts. I'm glad they got Scotty down.
Yep, I agree with you there. That was definitely some of the highlights of the issue, that the character moments were pretty much on point with the show, with the happenings on the Enterprise, which was a kind of a contradiction for some of the happenings on the planet below. But, I guess we can't have everything, but it's nice to see that all of our beloved characters are represented relatively well, and remaining hopeful for the future.
Yes.
For more. So that about wraps up our coverage of Gold Key Comics issue number 16, Day of the Inquisitors. And thank you very much, Chris, for stepping in here and sitting in for Mr. Craig Cohen, who is off on assignment this week. Craig will be back on the show. Following up on an announcement that we made on Facebook this past week. So it appears that luck has been with us, and numerically, mathematically, the way that it's worked out with these Gold Key comics, there are 3 more Gold Key comics to cover, which will be episodes 97, 98, and 99. And the 100th episode of our show, the way the comic publication dates fell, the premiere of the animated series happens before the release of the next Gold Key comic. So that means episode 100 of the Tricorder transmissions of our regular series will be the first episode of the animated series on our show. So we're pretty excited that it lined up that way. I know you've been looking forward to that, Chris.
Yes, I've been looking forward to the animated series.
Yes, and I know a lot of our listeners have been asking when we were going to get to the animated series. And I know we've been very cagey and dicey about committing to any dates for that. But, crunching the numbers now and looking at the dates of the publications of the next few issues of the comic, it just happens to coincide perfectly. So what we've been trying to do, and I know we haven't made a very good case for this, we haven't really publicly talked much about what we intended to do in the background here. And I guess the way that it's working out is we're kind of going through the adventures of the original series crew as they were released. And I know the UK had comics that were happening around this time. We just don't have access to them at this point to include them in the order. So we were going original series, season 1, 2, and 3. Then we were doing the Gold Key comics kind of that fell in between. And then we were picking up the animated series. So our coverage is going to be a mix now of the animated series mixed with the Gold Key comics that were coming out during that same time period. So
so they had them actually going concurrent then, huh?
Yep, they were concurrent. So we're gonna keep up with the Gold Keys as well, but we're gonna be doing animated series stuff at the same time. So this is gonna be a fun adventure. I'm looking forward to getting back to the commentaries, and Craig will be here, of course, for those commentaries, and maybe we'll have some special guests joining us for some discussions about these animated series episodes. I know you were pretty amped about that, Chris.
Oh, yes, that'd be cool.
Yes, so we are looking forward to that. So any closing remarks for our audience as we close up, Chris?
Oh, just thanks a lot for having me on again. And I think that David Bowie would have made a really good Vulcan in the movie, but we shall not see that. So.
I agree. Yes, rest in peace, David Bowie. He passed away this week, and by the time this show goes live, he'll have passed several days prior. But it is a shame when these incredible icons, these incredible artists pass away, and I feel that now we're getting to the stage where a lot of these great artists from the 60s and 70s are going to start leaving us, and it's very, very depressing that these great minds, and Bowie, I think we went a little bit early. He could have hung around a while longer. I mean, we've got some of the other old rockers who are still around and still giving us new music, and it's a shame that he lost his battle. And yes. I see a lot of great outpouring, and I know a lot of our listeners also expressed the condolences. So R.I.P. David Bowie. All right, so that brings us to a close of episode 96. We'll be back next week with episode 97, and keep your eyes peeled. We're currently in production for episode 1 of Shore Leave. That is Trek Convention Chat with myself and my new co-host Heather Barker, who has appeared on several episodes of the show already. She will be my regular co-host on that show, and we will have many guests, as well as recurring guests from other series who are going to be joining us to talk about their convention experiences. Not necessarily always about the Las Vegas convention, of course. There are many other Trek cons that happen across the world. We plan to have people from other countries involved, giving us their impressions of Trek cons in other countries, and it's going to be very, very fun and very cool. And Chris, since your first Star Trek Las Vegas convention is coming up this year, we fully expect you to participate in some of these.
Oh, certainly.
Awesome. So thanks a lot, everybody, for tuning in. You can find us at the tricordertransmissions.com, Twitter at TTT_pod, and Facebook, facebook.com/the Tricorder Transmissions. Thanks again for listening. We look forward to talking to you on social media, and we'll see you next week.